let us join together in singing hymn number 109 in the Gray Hymnal as we come marching, marching. And you might want to pick up your Gray Hymnal hopefully you have one. Oh, there we go. The words will be projected on the wall in front as well. Okay.
Good morning. It was temptation, wasn't it, to stay home or play out in the sun today. It's such a beautiful weekend. We've had such rainy weather lately, and so I'm really glad to see the sunshine. And seeing you is like sunshine for me, so thank you for the gift of your presence. So when I say welcome here, I want to say welcome home, because this is our common spiritual home. Even if you're here for the first time, you can make this your home. And I would like to suggest that during the fellowship hour, if you want to wander around the grounds, feel free. We have a big place, and it's a lot of interesting things to see and do. There are little paths you can walk. If you want to explore around, we just want you to make yourself at home. But we will have a fellowship hour after the service today, so you'll have a chance to sit and drink a cup of coffee and chat with people. But just want you to feel home. I want everybody to feel home here. So thanks for coming. It's good to see all of you. Why don't you take just a moment to greet those around you, just to say good morning and hello, and then I'll ring the bell to gather us back, just to make sure everybody gets greeted. Thank you.
We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment until we claim ourselves awareness and gratitude. Take the time to look into one another's faces and see communion, the reflection of our own eyes, this house of laughter and silence, memory and hope is hallowed by our presence together. Let us speak together our affirmation. Love is our doctrine, compassion is our way. Here we seek to create a joyful home for free religious exploration, build a community of caring fellowship, nurture the hopes, and serve the needs of our world. Arousing. Beauty is expressed in infinite ways, like the shifting contours of a candle flame. We nurture beauty when we light the inner candle of one another. Rick will light our 3 chalices. The first chalice is for members and friends of this Unitarian Universalist congregation of Salem. We light our second chalice for our partner church in Šimanfalva, Transylvania, Romania. We light our third chalice for our children and youth in religious education and all around the world. Let's sing the flame into life. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome all the children and those young at heart who would like to come and sit on the floor. I may be young at heart, but sitting on the floor is not that great. Oh, good. I have somebody to come up here. Are you two coming up? Good. Okay, today we have a story called Lucy's Blooms, and I believe the pictures will be up on the screen. And I'm going to read them down here where I can see them easier. Okay, let's begin. Lucy wove her wagon through the meadow behind Graham's house. She breathed in the soft, sweet smell as hundreds and hundreds of bright yellow blooms danced tall and proud in the wild grass. While Lucy wandered, she sang Graham's gardening song. Load up the wagon and off we go. Plant little seeds and watch them grow. A clump of blooms leaned in to listen. Lucy stopped and smiled. Hello there, she said. Would you like to enter a flower contest? We could surprise Graham with a blue ribbon. The blooms swayed in the breeze as if to nod their approval. First, I need to move you, Lucy said, as she gently shoveled the blooms out of the ground and into a cozier spot. She scooped handfuls of soil until the flower pot was full. The blooms stood still. Now wait here, Lucy said, patting down the last bit of soil. The flower festival is in 3 days, but I'll come back to visit you tomorrow. Lucy danced tall and proud, just like the blooms in the meadow, all the way back to Graham's house. Oh my, what a lovely show, said Graham, clapping her hands. You must be ready for a cool drink after all that whirling and waving. While Graham poured the pitcher, she whistled a song. Lucy stood close to listen. The blooms dug their roots into the soil and explored their new surroundings. But as the day lingered on, the soil grew dry and the blooms began to fade. The next morning, Lucy returned to find her blooms drooping over the side of their pot. Oh no, she said. You must be thirsty. Let's get you some water. Lucy lifted her watering can and sprinkled her blooms. While Lucy watered, she whistled a song. Her blooms perked up to listen. Much better, said Lucy. I'll come back first thing tomorrow to give you another drink. Lucy skipped back to the house to draw pictures of her blooms for Graham. Oh my, what a cheery bunch, said Graham. And I'll bet they're hardy too. Did I ever tell you the story about the daisies I knew that liked to play hide and seek? Lucy nestled next to Graham on the porch swing to listen. The blooms tried to nap in the meadow, but the blazing sun was too bright. The next day when Lucy returned, she found her blooms curled and crisp. Oh no, said Lucy. You must be uncomfortable. Maybe you'd like a shadier spot. She wheeled the wagon under the old oak tree and climbed onto Graham's tire swing. Did you know that once upon a time, Graham played hide and seek with some daisies? Her blooms perked their sunny faces out to listen. Ah, much better, said Lucy when her story was finished. I'll come back first thing tomorrow to take you to the contest. Lucy skipped back to the house and snuggled under a blanket to watch the sunset with Graham. Oh my, this is my favorite part, said Graham. Mine too, said Lucy. The blooms shivered in the cool evening air. The next morning, Lucy's blooms huddled together in the center of their pot. Oh no, said Lucy, you must have been too cold last night. Lucy brought her blooms out into the sun. She sprinkled more water on her blooms. She whistled more songs to her blooms. She told more stories to her blooms. Then she danced a little dance for her blooms. Lucy's blooms bobbed playfully as they basked in Lucy's love. Much better, said Lucy. Now you're ready to win. The judges looked at Lucy's blooms. They sniffed at Lucy's blooms. They measured Lucy's blooms. Then one of the judges opened the rule book and pointed to the small print. "Aha," she said. "These are a bunch of weeds. And as the rule book says, no weeds allowed." Another judge said. Lucy wilted. The weeds went white. "Tough break, kid," said the first judge. "Better luck next time," said another as they moved on to the prize table. Lucy watched as the winners were announced. Most beautiful, most fragrant, most colorful. She stood by her blooms and breathed in their soft, sweet smell. Their cottony tufts tickled her nose. "Don't worry," Lucy said. "You win the grand prize, most loved." Her bloom shimmered in the sun. "Come on," said Lucy with a smile. "I'll race you back to Graham's." She took hold of her wagon and ran. A fantastic flurry of silky seeds swirled and twirled behind her. The end. Does anybody know what those flowers were? Pardon? She said dandelions. How many of you agree that's probably what they were?
Yeah.
All that stuff flowing in the back. Okay, do you guys have dandelions in your garden sometimes? And in your grass? Yeah, I try to dig them out, but it doesn't do any good. You have lots of them? 100, that is a lot. Okay, I know, so is mine sometimes. Okay, thank you very much for listening. And let's get up, and the adults are going to make the love arch, and we're going to go back to our classes.
Take a moment now to just settle into your seat and breathe a nice deep breath and bring yourself into this moment. We're always in this moment. And how we live in this moment shapes how we will live in moments to come. Long ago, ancient sages taught us how we think, so we become. And so we focus our minds on one another and ourselves and look at life through a compassionate lens. Compassion is a practice. It's a habit. It's a good habit to form. Every day we have choices as to how we will regard ourselves and how we will regard other people. Let us always be mindful to rest in the moment and be aware of the fullness of life and the fullness of humanity of those around us. For compassion is our way. It is our practice. And gratitude. So often we yearn for what we don't have, and yet life is such a gift. Let us rest in awareness of the giftedness of this life, of one another, of love and beauty and joy. Let us open our eyes and our hearts that we might be filled with gratefulness, as we walk this path of life day by day, moment by moment. May it be so.
Good morning. I'm George Pitter. I'm your Lifelines Lay Ministry representative this morning. Joys and concerns can be communicated to us either by using the church website or by writing them down in the book in the foyer. We can also be contacted on the website. I will start out with two concerns here. The first one is from Gloria Holland. Please send prayers and all positive thoughts to Walt Rutherford, Reverend Bonnie Tarwater's husband, who is having heart surgery this morning. And a concern from Jackie O'Malley. I'm seeking help from our members' collective wisdom, what works for you type of information, with an end goal to develop more understanding among our members and maybe to eventually compile writings on these bits of wisdom. I envision a variety of topics, one of which is how do you restore inner peace during times like this when people in our own country are at war with each other? And fear, agitation, and fear seem to have taken over. And her contact information will be in the book out in the foyer. I have three joys this morning. First, from Barbara Stebbins-Bowes and Bob Muir. Johnny, Laura Lynn, Marin, and Elliot, our children and grandchildren, are leaving on a grand adventure. On Tuesday, they will be moving to the Netherlands. Will they ever come back? Not soon, but we'll go to visit. Bon voyage. And from an anonymous person here that says, April Waters, who painted the Opal Creek on the east wall, has a lovely exhibit at the Hallie Ford Museum of Art, paintings and photos of the Antarctic, and it's free on Tuesday. And from Carrie Lynn Patterson, Ryan Nelson and I survived skydiving yesterday. What a blast. We light one last candle for all the joys and concerns that weren't shared with us today. Thank you.
You may remain seated for the pastoral hymn, number 300 in the gray hymnal, With Heart and Mind.
Search for
I should warn you, there is a violent element in what I'm about to read. It was a beautiful late afternoon in spring, and I needed to take a walk to clear my head of work-related stuff. I love that time of day when the late afternoon light makes everything glow. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. There was a path near my home that went through the woods down to a slough of the river. Excited, I practically skipped there. The birds were singing their last songs as the shadows grew long. The robins seemed especially enthusiastic, their songs echoing in the trees. I felt the tension of work dissolve as beauty gently drew me in. But what was that lying on the path by the water? Have you ever felt the earth shift under your feet in seconds? Have you ever gone from serene to scared in a heartbeat? I ran all the way home and called the police. I was transformed by what I saw. My heart and mind, so open to beauty and wonder, were shattered by violence, by evil. What lay on the path was the body of a man that, I later learned, had been executed with a bullet to the head. The crime scene had to be guarded overnight. I felt so scared for the officer on watch that he might be in danger. The sanctuary of the woods had suddenly become a place of threat and fear. And yet, as the days went by, another transformation was occurring in my mind and heart, more slowly than the first, but real and so unexpected. I learned from the sheriff the victim's name, that he had a family, a job, a story of his own. He was Hispanic and worked to support his family at a recycling business. As the person that he was took shape, my fears were replaced by sadness and loss. The sense of evil was replaced by tragedy. To this day, I wonder, was I meant to find him in this isolated place? Where are his children now? Did the taking of his life benefit someone? Was justice done in the finding of his killer? Who is still grieving? So many unanswered questions. But one thing I do know is that my fear of such violence was transformed into something else. Compassion? Yes, I think it was compassion. I can't get his life back, but knowing something about his life opened the door to compassion, and this helped to heal my trauma. I came to see that my life is tied to that victim. No, more than that, to that person who is worthy of respect and love. May he rest in peace.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for selecting such a moving reading. And thank you for the choir for jumping up and doing it in the last minute. And I love hearing the music and the way you got things started today. I wanted to light a candle before I start my sermon this morning. I just got a call yesterday from Bob Francis. His wife, Cindy Francis, is passing. And so we light a candle. I promised Bob we would light a candle for Cindy this morning, so I did want to do that. And we're thinking of her right now. May she have a peaceful passing. And may Bob find the support and healing that he needs as he rejoins our community. So ever since I became interested in human spirituality as a young man, I've always been drawn to stories about spiritual transformation. In the psychology, it figures because the psychology of religion was my primary academic interest when I was in theology school. And my favorite book that we got assigned among all our texts was William James's great classic, The Varieties of Religious Experience. It's a lot about the psychology of religion and how we change, how we transform. So it was natural that the story of the radical transformation of a young Roman citizen named Alipio, he lived in the 3rd and 4th centuries, it was natural that this story of Alipio would lodge itself in my memory many years ago when I first read St. Augustine's Confessions, his autobiography, his Confessions. And lately, this story's been bubbling up in my mind, and I've wondered why. Alipio was a friend of Augustine. He was a fine and sensitive young man who came to Rome to study law. Yet for Alipio, it was not when in Rome, do as the Romans do, because he, Alipio, was morally repulsed by the brutal gladiator fights that drew tens of thousands to the Roman Colosseum. And at this point in history, Roman history, these gladiatorial spectacles have been going on for centuries, 5, 6, 7 centuries, much longer than we've existed as a nation. Can you imagine a tradition that long that reaches back that many hundreds of years? Spectators came from all classes of society. Upper class fathers made it their business to make sure that their sons came to the gladiator fights because they wanted to toughen them up. They wanted them to see it's a rough world out there and you have to be prepared to rule by force. So these gladiator fights often pitted a trained gladiator, a valuable asset, against a criminal or a foreign captive who generally had much less fighting skill. And it was these poor, terrified souls who usually ended up lying bleeding in the sand, breathing their last, while the crowd roared in celebration. What a way to die. Oh my God. So naturally, Alipio was morally repulsed, offended by this barbarity, would never have entered the Colosseum of his own accord. But then one day, he and his law school buddies were walking near the Colosseum, and as a practical joke, a crude practical joke, they overpowered Alipio and they dragged him into the Colosseum. Well, he said, that doesn't matter. I'm going to cover my ears and my eyes. I'm not going to watch what's happening. I'm going to shut out the entire spectacle. But this wasn't enough. When 100,000 spectators were suddenly cheering when a gladiator was wounded, and Alipio's curiosity got the better of him, and he peeked between his fingers to see, what is this ruckus all about? 100,000 people cheering. And then, in the words of Augustine, he peeked, he looked, and so he, Alipio, received a greater wound in his soul than that gladiator had received in his body. Because afterwards, with the spilled blood, he drank in the joy and cruelty. And so from that moment on, noted Augustine, Alipio became a devoted fan of the gladiator fights. Never missed a show. Never missed a show. Now I know, normally when you think of spiritual transformation, we assume it has an upward trajectory. But the example of Alipio has reminded me sometimes it goes the other way, downward. Alipio's not at all alone. When you think about the innumerable times in history when people have lost contact with their better selves and they've gotten swept up into what I call the pseudo-transcendence. It feels transcendence, but it's not real. The pseudo-transcendence of the mob, the collective, the people. You can see that these kind of regressive transformations are all too common, all too common. This is a very common spiritual transformation. It's just going the wrong direction. There's a journalist and author, Christopher Hedges, really interesting writer. Before he became a journalist, Hedges studied and earned his Master of Divinity degree at Harvard Divinity School, and he studied with James Luther Adams, one of the premier Unitarian Universalist theologians of the 20th century. And so I was reading a book by Hedges. I'll tell you about it in a second. It really helped me get a better understanding of what's at play here, why people like violence and would get addicted to it. For years, Hedges was a war correspondent who embedded with the troops in war zones. So he was a reporter, but he was sort of like a soldier too, because he was out there with the troops. And he accompanied them on their missions. He got to know them. He was keenly aware of the threat posed by the enemy. And so over time, he bonded with these soldiers. He shared in their sense of common purpose. He experienced the adrenaline rush and the intense focus of combat situations. He felt alive in these moments. But after a time, he knew it was time to get out. Here's what Hedges finally realized. The rush of battle is a potent and often lethal addiction, for war is a drug, one I ingested for many years. Later in the book, he writes that war gives us purpose, resolve, a cause. It allows us to be noble. Hence, the provocative title of his book, which is War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. War is a force that gives us meaning. That's what he discovered. And therein lies the great irony. How often is it that people get swept up into what they imagine is noble and righteous, and yet it turns out to be anything but. It becomes ignoble. But when something is addictive, you cease caring whether it's noble or not. And big tech understands how addictive the feeling of being outraged is, and they are more than willing to stimulate our appetite for spite and bearing ill will. They know that, and they'll put you in touch with another video or article or something that will further inflame you, because they want you clicking. They don't care what kind of a person you become as long as you keep clicking. These days, it's hard not to get drawn into some cultural or political battle and have to choose sides. And indeed, choosing sides is sometimes unavoidable. And what follows from that is nearly unavoidable, and that is to fall prey to wishing ill of those who are on the other side, who are red states or the blue states or whatever it is. And in this process, those on the other side, as you become desensitized to their humanity, they become dehumanized. I've often thought about people on the other side, and I can feel so righteous and indignant as I think about how can they be so stupid or ignorant or greedy or bigoted or elitist, those on the other side? How can they not take climate change seriously? How can they not take racial justice or whatever? You can get so bent out of shape. I do anyway. And thus, the mind can easily fall prey to addictive patterns of thought and bearing ill will towards certain others, especially those you deem worthy of punishment. I can think of folks who I think need to face some punishment, some holding to account, and I have to honestly confess that I do bear feelings of ill will towards them. For example, I bear ill will towards the dictator of Russia. I do. I can't help myself. He's caused so much suffering. So much suffering. The list of those for whom it's not a challenge for me to summon up feelings of ill will is longer than just one dictator, but I won't go there today. Sometimes Feels like it's more of a challenge to not summon up such feelings of ill will when I think of certain categories of people. Perhaps you have your own list, your own categories of people that you are angry at. But here's what often gets overlooked in this transaction. It was something that was recognized by Augustine. In order for the gladiator fights to be interesting, the spectators chose sides. They often would dress the gladiators up so they would represent some symbolic thing, so they would have a reason to choose sides. But you have to choose sides, just like in modern sporting events. People don't show up at the football stadium not caring which side wins. They just want to watch the game. That's not how it works. And so it was the same thing with the gladiators' fights. They wanted one person to die. They wanted one person to get trounced. All of which meant that in the intensity of combat, the spectators at the gladiator fights, they were actively rooting for the death of a fellow human being, which I think is a form of bearing ill will. In regards to the effect that this had upon Alipio, Augustine's haunting phrase stays with me. And so he, Alipio, received a greater wound in his soul than that gladiator had received in his body. Well, what kind of a wound is Augustine referring to here? To get the answer, you don't need to go back to the days of ancient Rome. You just need to look to soldiers who are returning from combat, many of whom have experienced high levels of serious distress, substance abuse, depression, suicidality. And the psychologists realized that these soldiers were suffering from something different than we all know about post-traumatic stress syndrome. But they looked at it more closely and they said, these soldiers coming back from the war are suffering, and they've been killing and shooting and other human beings. They are suffering from what they call moral injury. Moral injury. And it has a debilitating effect on these soldiers. In the language of the psychologists, moral injury is defined as a disruption of an individual's confidence and expectation about their own motivation or capacity to behave and adjust in an ethical manner. Moral injury is a deep wound that pierces a person's identity, sense of morality, and relationship to society. This is a huge concept you have to let it soak in. You think about what these soldiers are doing, and then there's this concept of moral injury, and it makes sense when you think about it, but it's not something that's immediately apparent. But then you realize this confirms what the great spiritual traditions have been saying for a long time, have long asserted, which is that when you do harm to another person, you also do harm to yourself. When you do great harm to another person, you do great harm to yourself. My favorite spiritual exploration of this dynamic and how it all works is found in the Buddhist poet Saint Shantideva's book. It's called The Way of the Bodhisattva. It's one of the great spiritual classics, and it's a resonant call for boundless compassion. I plan to reread it pretty soon. I need to. What Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, it's a spiritual classic, but it's not necessarily a fun read because it will often stop you in your tracks and make you realize how you have gotten sucked up in some drama and that you do bear ill will towards others. And when this happens, I know it's time for me to apply a litmus test to my religion. Regarding this test, the great religious writer Karen Armstrong, she noted that the one and only test of a valid religious idea, doctrinal statement, spiritual experience, or devotional practice is that it must lead directly to practical compassion. If your understanding of the divine makes you kinder, more empathetic, and impels you to express this sympathy in concrete acts of loving kindness, this is good theology. But if your notion of God makes you unkind, belligerent, cruel, or self-righteous, I should also add, if your notion of politics makes you unkind, belligerent, cruel, or self-righteous, or if it leads you to kill in God's name, it's bad theology. Compassion was the litmus test for the prophets of Israel, for the rabbis of the Talmud, for Jesus, for Paul, for Muhammad, not to mention Confucius, Lao Tzu, Buddha, and the sages of the Upanishads. And there are days when I don't want to take this test. I don't want to take this litmus test because it's too big of a stretch. After all, there really are people in the world who are causing harm. How can you not bear ill will towards those who bear ill will towards me, to all of us? How do you do that? Well, the distinction that Martin Luther King Jr. made has often been helpful for me. When he and King and the other blacks and the civil rights workers were facing the segregationists who were infected with the spiritual virus of racism, he told his followers they did not have to like the segregation. No, you don't have to like these people. You don't have to like them. No, I'm not going to ask you to do that. You don't have to like them. You do have to love them, though. What? You have to love them. Why? Because Jesus said you have to love your enemies. You have to love your enemies. Likewise, a Buddhist source that predates Jews, Jesus said, have mercy on your own enemies and treat all people with a merciful heart. This is the teaching of all the enlightened. The ancient Greeks called this agape love, A-G-A-P-E, agape love, which is universal, selfless, unconditional love. The Buddhists call it boundless compassion. And I call this a supreme spiritual challenge, embodying boundless compassion, agape love. It's a challenge that sometimes seems is not being met very often in our coarse, polarized times. Today, vitriol and venom are our vintages of choice. And I fear the harm that ingesting this is doing to all of us. Even as soldiers returning from combat suffer from moral injury, I worry about the harm we in our nation unwittingly inflict upon ourselves when we bear ill will, when we hate and fear and despise others and one another. Soldiers suffering from moral injury, you can be healed, are advised to find healing by engaging with some community so there can be a shared process of healing. And indeed, this is how Alipio finally found healing from his moral injuries. After celebrating death at so many bloody spectacles, he had done himself considerable harm. But then he joined the early Christian community. They always said, how can you tell the Christian, in the earliest days of Christianity, how can you tell the Christian, who are the Christians? They said, well, they're the ones who love so much. They love one another. That's how you can tell who a Christian is. In the early days, kind of went downhill after that at some points, but they were at a good start, and I liked that. And so Alipio joined an early Christian community, and there he found love, and he found himself again. And he was never found at the Colosseum cheering the deaths of his fellow human beings. And thus it was that Alipio did have an upward trajectory on his spiritual transformation, a transformation that healed his damaged soul. And so even during these harsh times, when fear and hatred seem to have the upper hand and many lose sight of their better selves, we continue to gather here in community week after week, again and again, to reconnect with our highest and holiest values. And may all who come here experience the healing of our wounds, the healing of the wounds that we have inflicted upon ourselves and upon each other. May this be a place of healing and hope, love and joy. So be it. Would you join me now for a period of quiet reflection as we think about our own lives, our daily lives, as we envision this world around us, as we envision the people around us, the people around us and the people beyond us. We often fall prey to ill will. Let us be mindful. Let us be mindful of not making that choice. Let's be mindful of choosing compassion and understanding as we walk our path. May it be so.
I invite you to share your generous gifts in support of UUCS. We also support the Salem community with donations to the Marion Polk Food Share. And the red wagon is coming up, and you may place your food donation in there. Each month we share Sunday donations with an organization that exemplifies our principles. For May, we are sharing the plate with Salem Harvest, a nonprofit that helps to address hunger in our local community. With many volunteers, it works with area farmers and homeowners to harvest fruits and vegetables that would otherwise go to waste. I happen to live next door to the founder of Salem Harvest, and he has made me aware of the many fruit-bearing trees, pears, apples, figs, quince, that grow in our own urban neighborhood that now get harvested. So you might want to look around in your neighborhood. Know that your donation to Salem Harvest is an act of respect and compassion that will help provide nutritious food to children, teenagers, adults, and families in our community. Your gifts, in whatever amount, are sincerely appreciated. For those who are here in person, you may make cash contributions or write a check made out to UUCS. Please place these in the basket as it comes to you. To make your donation online, visit the website, click on Donate, and follow the instructions. Thank you for supporting this congregation and our wider community.
Simplicity.
next Sunday, we're going to be hearing from Gloria Holland, and we are so glad to see you back on your feet, more or less, Gloria. And spirituality, is it just a walk in the park? Yes, it is, and that's the answer. Say, no, we don't know. I want to find out. We have a flower communion coming up. I just spoke to Ruben Habito. He's going to be our guest speaker for the homily for that part of the service. He's a Zen master, great guy. I enjoyed meeting him. Please remember to bring a flower that Sunday if you can. If you forget, don't worry, we'll have extra flowers, but it's going to be a great thing. You can also send in pictures of flowers so that we can display them during the service. So let's see, what else have we got going on? You can keep up with all the news of our community. Easier than listening to me ramble through it is to go online and look and see all the different things that are happening in the life of our community. You could also get on our newsletter mailing list if you'd like to do that too. So that's good enough, I think, for that slide. And I don't know if there's another one with, nope, that's it for the announcements.
While Rick lights the social justice lantern, let me speak these words of the late Thich Nhat Hanh. Society is only a manifestation of our collective consciousness, and our collective consciousness has a lot of fear, violence, and hatred in it. It is possible to transform our heart. Not much time is needed. The transformation can be born the moment you vow to go in the direction of peace and service. Thank you, Rick. Rick will extinguish the other chalices. May we use our internal flame to kindle the beauty in each other. Our closing hymn is number 347, Gather the Spirit. Please rise in body or spirit.
Thank you.
Please remain standing. If you are comfortable with this, put your hand in your neighbor's hand or on their shoulder while we say together the closing words. May faith in the Spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love for the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come.